So thank you, everybody. My name is Beth Gerstein, and I'll be hosting you for the tour this afternoon. And for those of you who celebrate, Happy Lunar New Year. And for everybody else, it happens to be National Drink Wine Day. So either way, it's kind of a win-win. And for everyone who's impacted by the storm and cold, I hope you're safe and warm, and suggest that you move to Southern California because you don't have to shovel sunshine. So before we begin the tour, and I hear there's people still coming in, I want to thank everyone who helped make this exhibition possible. The Pasadena Art Alliance, the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, the Do Foundation, Jason Lau, Ralph M. Parsons Foundation, Ruth and Joseph Reed Foundation for the Arts, and Susan and John Sasaki. We couldn't have done this exhibition without their support. I'd also like to thank our founder, David Armstrong, and his amazing team who do expert installation work. I'd also like to thank our donors, our members, as well as the board of directors. I also want to thank Nathan Stanfield, who's our exhibition manager, Paul Roach, who's director of advancement and communications and is running the camera today, so you won't see him, and Ashley Rowley, our education manager. We're a small but mighty staff and do amazing things as a group. So this exhibition, Making in Between Contemporary Chinese American Ceramics, started to develop in 2018. We were interested in the idea that the United States of America is frequently described as a nation of immigrants. And the reasons for immigration are diverse. It's for the search of better economic opportunities, the escape from persecution, and the pursuit of sanctuary, or to reunite with family or loved ones. Today, almost 90 million immigrants and individuals with Chinese heritage live in the United States. This exhibition highlights the work of 6 first and second generation Chinese American ceramic artists. The work of these artists share themes of cultural heritage, identity, language, politics, migration, and displacement. And while their works are unmistakably individual, they share a rich heritage shaped by their American and Chinese experiences. Immigration and the global movement of people continues to be a divisive topic. Despite this, people with diverse histories and heritages have driven and continue to drive artistic production and innovation. Our cultural fabric has been enriched by the contributions of the artisans in this exhibition and the countless others that have come to call the United States their home. So with that, we're going to walk through the exhibition together. And each artist, I'll do a brief intro when we hit their first piece. And each of the artists will respond to their work as we go along. So the first artist is Wanxin Zhang. And Paul, if you want to join me over here.
Beth, are you sure you want me first? I think the ladies.
Of course I want you first. Well, we'll do you actually get sort of like a few times in the show.
Okay.
So Wanxin was born in 1961 in Changshan, China. He received a BFA in sculpture from the prestigious Leshun Academy of Fine Art in China before emigrating in 1992 to San Francisco. Wanxin received an MFA from the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, where he served as an instructor from 1996 to 2010. And he's currently an instructor of sculpture and ceramics at the San Francisco Art Institute. So this piece that you're seeing now is a self-portrait from 2018. And Wanxin, would you give us a little history on this work?
Okay, this is a little small piece I call the self-portrait. I have a similar scale, similar pieces, different scale in my studio. I will say this is not physically look like myself, but I rather call the self-portrait because this is like a necessary like a physical look like, but I see myself like a traveler, the thinker, and the cross the from distance reasons. That's why I always call this kind of works like my small self-portraits. I will say that changing my location from China and come to the United States has completely changed my mind. I always think about this way as an artist.
Thank you. And we'll be seeing more of your work as we walk around the exhibition.
Okay, good, thanks.
So this is not it for you. So the next artist we're going to introduce is Jennifer Daycek. Sorry, Jennifer, you are up next. And Jennifer was born in 1980 in Ohio and spent her childhood in Brooklyn, New York. Her mother immigrated from China a decade before her birth, and her father is a native Ohioan, was born to Russian and Irish immigrants. Jennifer holds an MFA from the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth, excuse me, and a BFA from Kent State University. She currently lives in San Antonio, Texas, where she is assistant professor of ceramics at Texas State University. Last year, she won a prestigious United States Artists Fellowship. We're really excited about that. This piece is titled Exotic AF from 2017. Jennifer, can you tell us about this piece and about the shards encased in the sculpture?
Yeah, hi Beth, hello everyone. Ni howdy from San Antonio, Texas. It's so nice to actually, for I think all of us, to walk through the exhibition since we haven't been able to see it. But Exotic AF, the exclamation point at the end of exotic, the term or the describer I've been called for a majority of my life that like fetishized my body and my existence. This stereotypical China girl figurine is from a hobby mold from the 1970s, where she has the China girl bob, the rice picker's hat. She's carrying a heavy shoulder yoke with baskets, and then she's barefoot. And even her body and her labor is fetishized on top this trophy case of broken blue and white willowware shards. Willowware is the most appropriated blue and white pattern of all over the world, with no known true central source of origin, but we attribute it most likely within Asian ceramics. That the broken shards are from willowware plates from the Netherlands, so Dutch, English, German, Japanese, and American willowware.
Did you make the mold yourself, or did you find the piece?
I found it in someone's garage in Massachusetts. And I started collecting these kind of racist and misogynist molds or hobbyist things. Just thinking about, like, if we are what we eat, like, we must be who we are with what we surround ourselves with. And now that people know that, I keep getting more, but it's like too many to know what to do with. So in some ways, it's my goal to empower them through other ways. And so that's how Exotic AF came about.
Do you want to tell us what the AF stands for the rest of the group?
If you spend time with me, you know that it's probably the word that comes out of my mouth more often than most, but it is something that is seen a lot in social media, hashtags, urban dictionary, slang, pop culture, urban culture, but AF means as fuck, the exclamation point at the end of a word.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
And now we're going to move on to Stephanie Shih. And Stephanie was born in 1986 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Chinese Taiwanese parents. She grew up in New Jersey before receiving her Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Boston University. Stephanie recently had a solo exhibition at the Perrotin Editions in New York City and has another exhibition scheduled in Los Angeles, which will be announced on her website shortly. The piece we're looking at is called Golden Child. And Stephanie, maybe you could share, when did you start using food in your art, and in particular dumplings?
Well, food has always been really important to me. It's been really important to my family. I think a lot has been written about how central food is in Chinese culture. It is not only about our cuisine, but pervades everything from religion to politics to medicine. And it's just a really vital part of the way we connect with each other. And so I have always been an avid cook, but it wasn't until this project that I brought food and my artwork together.
I'm with you.
Beautiful.
And the next piece we're going to look at is a work by Beth Lo. Beth was born in 1949 in Lafayette, Indiana, shortly after her parents emigrated from China. She received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Michigan and a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Montana in the 1970s, where she studied with renowned ceramicist Rudy Audio. When Audio retired in 1985, Beth succeeded him as professor of ceramics, a position she holds to this day. Beth, this piece is entitled Flood. You frequently reference water in your work. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. First of all, I retired, so I know.
Sorry, I missed that.
There. That's okay. You probably had an old resume. This all of my work uses the image of the child in it for reasons that the child to me symbolizes innocence and also potential, and also as a parent the need to realize that you can influence a person for better or for worse in this world. Water is a symbol of both life and also of danger. And these particular little babies are stuck in their pails, and the title refers both to a flood, which might be a natural disaster, and the pails are placed around the room as if there's a leak in the roof and you would have to catch water in the different places that the roof is leaking. And this particular piece, and also references a flood of tears, but in any case, the piece comes from something very specific, trauma in my own life, but I've decided, I've made a decision not to talk about it. So I'll dangle that for you guys to think about. But I think in general, it refers to isolation and frustration, danger, fear of the future. And in particular, this piece maybe has less to do with race than some of the others, but I think it does refer to that sense of isolation and an inability to overcome that some of us have felt as outsiders of the culture, of the main culture. Also, another thing about water is in the I Ching, there's the water hexagram. And for a little while, I was obsessed with throwing the I Ching. I had to throw it every day to make any decision. And I kept getting the water hexagram, which is also called water the abysmal, which has sort of fearful connotations, but also the I Ching always tells you how to get beyond and how to be strong afterwards. So there's a little reference to that in terms of water.
Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
And staying on the water theme, when Paul continues his tour over here, is a piece by Jennifer that is titled Sampler of an American-Born Chinese from 2016. And Jennifer, could you tell us a little bit about this piece?
Yes, I am really interested in the history of alphabet samplers in the United States. They were made around the 18th, 19th century. They are considered the first form of education for females in this country. And it's where young girls were taught to stitch the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, the alphabet, their name, and the date. And I thought about my hair, which categorizes me as Asian when people meet me, and they'll say my eyes, but my nose doesn't look Chinese. That my hair was the thread to my culture, my race and ethnicity. It links me to my mother and our home country. And so I collected the hair from the shower drain every day and then made it into tiny threads. And these are porcelain, slipcast porcelain shower drains. So I stitched my version of an alphabet sampler. If you've ever been called an ABC, it means you're American-born Chinese, so less than Chinese, less than being full. And so oftentimes too, the racial ethnic slurs I've been called, or I've heard my mother called while I'm standing there, I never know if I'm to out myself, but then also to be recognized in that moment is something I still am trying to understand. And that a lot of these racial and ethnic slurs I've not heard since a child, but I did hear a lot during the Trump presidency. that I can add more to these, but it also is just exhausting to keep thinking about these words that are often spoken in existence and disappear, but this was my way to give them physicality, and that these words have power.
Thank you, Jennifer. And staying with your work, we have a video that you did as an art piece that's called Whitewash. And can you tell us what's happening in the video?
The material of porcelain is the foundation to my practice, and that this video performance is a way to dematerialize it, but still honor its ceramics history, tradition, and its origin of porcelain being discovered in China over 2,000 years ago, that it was this desire for whiteness that fueled and consumed the world. I use porcelain as a metaphor for this desire for whiteness as a privileged racial class, but also understanding shadeism and colorism exists in all race and ethnicities, and that my family is considered brown Chinese because we're from Guangzhou and darker, but knowing that my mother sought love in a white man. So this idea of finding love in something that is opposite of me. So this is a performance of domestic labor, of washing these slip cast porcelain unfired tea sets so that they become liquid clay material again to adorn my face. So this desire, this beauty ritual for this desire for whiteness that seems absurd and just can keep going.
And I'm not sure if you can hear in the video the sound of the water and the washing and the dishes breaking down. And the video runs for about 6 minutes. Jennifer?
Yes, it's a continuous loop, and sometimes I perform that piece live, and it takes about 45 minutes to break down enough tea sets to cover my face.
Oh, there it goes again. Yes, we got it just in time that we've been having trouble with the video today. So the next piece we're going to see is one of Stephanie Shih's, and it's one of her pantry pieces. And Stephanie, I'll let you jump in and talk about this work.
Sure. So when I started folding the dumplings, I was really surprised at how much the diaspora and the Asian American community responded to it. And I was really touched by it. But something else that I was the recipient of was a lot of, kind of subtly racialized remarks about, oh, are you going to start answering your phone? May I take your order? You should sell the dumplings in egg roll wrappers, or, I realized that the way that Americans interact with Chinese food is largely through takeout. And a question that I got a lot was, are you going to make soy sauce to go with the dumplings? And I wanted to make a grocery item that I felt would be sort of a nod to other Asian Americans who know that the most important ingredient in dumpling sauce is not soy sauce, but is actually black vinegar. So this black vinegar bottle was the first of all of the groceries that I made, and the whole project kind of grew from there. I started making all of the different pantry items, and what I realized was that because as immigrants and children of immigrants, we only have a limited number of brands to choose from, because we can only choose from what has been imported from East Asia into the States. So each individual brand becomes kind of a monolith. Everyone uses the same brands, everyone recognizes the same brands, and so it becomes really iconic. And so I've been exploring the idea of Asian American identity through the lens of the pantry.
And can you talk about your objects are not meant to be trompe l'oeil? I mean, can you sort of talk about the forms and the surface?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to have a body of work that's all replication, but at the same time, I could be slip casting these and getting even closer to perfect replication, but I really love this fingerprinted texture. I love the way it makes the work a little bit hazy, not unlike a memory.
I really like the handling of the clay. It's very soft and warm and appealing, and lots of great memories. And I like that you included some spam.
Thank you so much, Beth. That really means a lot to me.
I use spam all the time.
And I think we'll stay with your work, Stephanie, and go to the ramen pieces.
So
talk about that series.
Yeah, so I think that I love the idea of instant noodles as something that is so ubiquitous for Asians in Asia and Asians within the diaspora. And the breadth is just kind of, you know, incredible how many different brands there are. And so this is just the beginning of a series that will be all instant noodles from different countries of origin.
That's great.
And in case you can't tell online, there is a little depth to these. So they sort of puff out from the wall. It's quite fun. And also the fact that you went for sort of that plasticky surface feeling, which some of the other pieces are a more matte finish.
Yeah, so for the finishes, I try to mimic whatever the material is in the original grocery. So for the bottled groceries, I will leave the paper labels unglazed and then use a high gloss on the bottle, and then a kind of subtle gloss on the plastic caps. And so for these, they're usually very shiny. So I went pretty high gloss here.
It really works. It's great. And now we're going to move on to Sin-ying Ho. Sin-ying was born in 1963 in Hong Kong. And in 1992, she emigrated to Canada to pursue a career in acting before pursuing a BFA from Nova Scotia School of Art and Design in Halifax, and then followed by an MFA from Sheridan College in Ontario, Canada. She's currently teaching at Queen's College, City University of New York, as an associate professor of ceramics. And this piece is titled World Garden #1 from 2014. Sin-ying, can you sort of talk about the imagery on this piece and the scale of the work and where you're making your work?
Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Beth, and 恭喜發財，恭喜發財，新年快樂, Happy New Year. Today is the 7 days of the Chinese New Year. It's everyone's birthday. Happy birthday, everyone.
Happy birthday.
So let me go back to talk to the world of the World Garden. The World Garden pieces is, if you're looking, the size of the piece is about 4 feet tall, and which is a slightly smaller than the one that I did it before. That one is about 6 to 7 feet tall. So this is 4 feet tall because it's a second version that I wanted to have a little more easier that I can handle in my studio and travel with my pieces. And I'm 5 feet tall, so I'm slightly taller than this one. And and the pieces, the images that I used, that was actually, I started from the bigger series that my vessel was about like 6 feet tall. And the series is called Eden. So the images that you look at is the figure of Adam. And then the other side is Eve. And the images that are a little more smaller is because of the form is round. So I wanted the two figures can see as one view. So I have a smaller of the Adam and Eve images there. As Beth introduced me that I was born in Hong Kong, and I growing up in a culture that's fuses with East and West culture. And but then I also facing a lot of obstacles when I grew up in Hong Kong, and it helped me to understand and practice being very accepted and forgiveness, and develop a mind of being very international. And so I create these pieces to refer to the global culture, and then the culture is defined and developed, constantly changing. In our heart, that we all search for imageries, and as a migration, as an immigrants, that for me, I don't look at everyone as different. We are all the same as a nature. So the nature of human beings that we're coming up with our human traits. We have greed, materialistic desire, hopes, and technology that universal human nature, human traits intrinsic to the concept of the series. And so when you look at the images that you can see the stock leaf inside the silhouette, and then you see that the arrow is constantly kind of going down, going up, down and up. So it implies that, you know, human beings always wanted to have a hope, and but we always want to have more and for that. So this piece is talk about the Garden of Edens that for me is to contemplate, a place that are beautiful and bliss that I can see more clear within myself. That's the piece that I created. I think that Beth, this piece that is is hope. The world garden is the other one.
You are correct. I got my title switched. You're right. This is hope number 1. I had the wrong thing in my notes. I apologize.
That's all right. So I was just trying to
World Garden's coming up.
Together.
Yeah. Sorry about that. And then the next piece we're going to go to is one of Wanxin's. And the title of this piece is Tank Man, brick color version from 2019. Wanxin, what was the inspiration for this piece? Wanxin, you might need to unmute.
Okay, everybody. This is not a small scale piece, 25, 26 inch. I really see like this kind of work, like a maquette, like a sketch. You know, the art for me is like a journey. You know, when you sit down to start an entrance, it may be not just be what today. And you may want to recall the story about your family, your friend, or just jot down commentary on the society around you. You may want to imagine what's going on, what happened tomorrow. It's like sometimes all kind of news or even fake news, any opinions. So all surround you will be inspiration for your idea. This little piece is response 30 years ago. What happened in China, in the Tiananmen student movement, and which is quite a big moment for us. I believe this is young men. I believe everybody remember this moment, this imagery, and one young man standing in front of a tank to stop the move forward. So whenever I think about, I recall the moment, and this guy always jumped to my mind. I think he's a truly unsung hero. So this is, for me, it's like a truly warrior. That's why I always make different things about this guy, different scale. This is wonderful studies. I think as I'm an artist, I have a right to do something about this. This is a part of my life, a part of our life.
I think one of the things I really like about this piece that I know you considered a maquette, but it's got such basic information in it, but you still completely get the sense of the figure and the sort of grounding of the figure.
That's right.
So really appreciate that. And then moving on to another one of yours, Wanxin, is a piece called What's Up To from 2011. Could you give us a little history on this piece?
Yes, you know, this is exactly 10 years ago. We start talk about the show later 2019. You know, that's the moment pandemic have not started yet. But I do remember during the opening day, you know, last March 18 was canceled by the California shelter in place. But this is a piece that probably you can imagine what happened in the war, what happened today. So, but when we think about the mask series, so respond to pollution, when I made this as a series, I respond to pollution and accommodation surrounding wars. And not just by the air, the waters, also some, the different kind of the pollution surrounding us. So I do remember the back then when I visited China, I talked to my mom. My mom always talked to us. Be prepare your mask because the Beijing the air is such a smog. This is quite bad air in this moment. So on another hand, this is the mask respirator series also can be part of the reason in the Cold War. I will say there's many layers for this piece. So by the way, this is the clay I want to mention everybody. I use the Toki paper clay, which is a very good clay. It's a lovely, very lovely clay. when I work in my studio, I tried a different kind of clay body, different kind of glaze, different kind of color. I always, frustrating for, something different. I don't want to keep one way, one color, or one, the stuff, clay bodies, and always a change. It gives you a different perception sometimes.
How
It's not the fire.
It's not.
It's not the fire, but not like the fire, right?
It's beautiful surface.
Yeah. But the water paper clay is only different from a regular, the stoneware. The shrinking, at least when I was working clay, but after firing.
Thank you.
Okay,
and
we're going to move forward.
We're going to move forward to another piece of yours.
Okay.
And this one is called Foggy Horse from 2010.
Well, this is not like, I will say this is maybe not a self-portrait. Sometimes when you had a blue moon or you can see the foggy moment, they just confusing for something or for some situations surround you. That I don't know. You guys, you have a similar experience like me. When you work in studio, you're mad for yourself. I believe everybody have a similar experience. I like many artists, but particular, I have been fascinated by the Bob Anderson. The Bob Anderson was a focus on many self-reflection sculptures, whatever the head, body, and the structures. That's why I like him. I like a lot. Yeah, I would say this is not a, the self-portrait.
Can you also talk about, you frequently use the sort of coin eyes or John Lennon glasses on your pieces?
That's right. This is the glass, like I would say like a confusion. Now everybody wear glasses for the clear seeing. But for me, I think this is kind of like describing my work. You see things clearer, but sometimes not.
I love this so much. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And the combination with the backpack with the American flag is really the clashing of the
reason I say this is another South Park because this journey, this is a long journey. The last year I had a show, 2019, I have a show in the local San Francisco called The Long Journey. I believe I'm the only artist here is different from you guys from mainland China. I'm living 30 years in China, but almost another 30 years in the United States. I always think about I'm like a traveler, like artist.
Thank you. And the next one we're going to look at is one of Sin-ying's. And the title of this piece is Occupied Central Hong Kong from 2014. Sin-ying, you want to tell us about this piece?
Sure. So I wrote it down because I have to be very correctly and politically correct. I described the piece so that nobody would kind of mistaking it. So in between is the best way to express myself as an immigrant and what is the state of mind and emotional sentiment towards my hometown. So I was born and grew up in Hong Kong, China, living in North America, almost nearly 29 years, like Wanxin, 30 years now, but I'm from Hong Kong, so very different kind of grew up and background. So in the past 29 years, I haven't stopped connecting my family and friends in Hong Kong, China. I travel back and forth from these two continents, negotiating the identity, embracing culture, colliding and blending, struggling in different value and belief system, facing contradictions and making balancing of everyday life, looking back and moving forward. So through social media, I receive from family and friends messages, images, opinions about protests in Hong Kong in 2014. Although I didn't witness and experience the incident on September 28, 2014, Occupy Central Hong Kong, I felt a moment of division of people in Hong Kong, my hometown. The artwork title, September 28, 2014, Occupy Central Hong Kong, was created at that time, and I couldn't express my sentiment towards the city of Hong Kong. So that's the reason that why I make that piece. So the images that you're looking at, I borrowed the image of blue ribbon wearing by a blue collar people in Hong Kong, the working class, and yellow ribbon wearing by Hong Kong pro-democracy protester to create an opposing force and tension. The Chinese character double happiness is separated. Fragments of vases. Vases in Canton and Chinese mean ping. Ping is also sounds peace in Chinese. Were split. However, these split pieces need to be maintained into a one piece. So I channeled my frustration, care, love, and hope into this artwork. We are living in a very complex world. I'm like some other immigrants, continue surviving, exploring, understanding, balancing, and embracing to live in the in-between.
Thank you. That was great. And now we'll move on to another piece by Jennifer Datchuk. And this one is called Money Honey from 2017. And Jennifer, you want to talk about this piece?
Yes. So I think growing up in a Chinese household, I was very much aware of the importance of money, but also the pressure to like fulfill and live the American dream and to be a dutiful daughter and become a doctor and lawyer, and that it was their worst fear that I became an artist. So I think in many ways, the first question, and I think this extends to all parents of children who want to be artists, is like, how are you going to make your money?
And you want to talk about the fact that you chose to document this in photography?
Oh,
sorry.
Of how it's this combination of these fake nails with, it's this collision of like fake nails, refined porcelain, how these are adornments to be worn on the body, that so much of how we talk about ceramics is like in relation to the pot and how we describe it in relation to the body, the lip, the foot, the shoulder. And so in many ways, I think about those constructions in my work and how I can show these pieces on. There's this contemporary access of like globalization, appropriation, nail art, social media, salon culture, all these ways in which we manufacture and appropriate identity, that even thinking about nail art, which is so much associated with Black culture, but how Asian women were able to make it more accessible for everyone. Thinking of those overlaps between Black and Asian and American culture, of thinking what it means to be American, and how can we even define that when we are a country built on immigrants. So in some ways, this is the knuckle ring is my form of protection too. As many times when I talk about my work and how I think about global migrations of identity and information, people often tell me, well, this is an American problem. And I think I'm still trying to understand what that means to be American. So the knuckle ring became this adornment that I would wear for protection, to get ready to have the world's long debate or argument over these things.
Thank you. And now we'll go back to you, Sin-ying, and we will give you the correct title because this is actually World Garden. And this piece is from 2014. Sin-ying?
I mute myself first, sorry.
There you go. Happens on every call.
Yeah, this piece I called it World Garden, and I hand painted the cobalt blue and all flowers there. And those flowers is what we call 100 flowers painting style. And they're all based on like a small expression, kind of a brush mark. And I use that as to embrace, as this garden belongs to the world garden, belongs to all of us. And although I have my background where I'm come from, I'm living in another place than different from my birthplace, but I do think that we all belongs to one world. So I have these images that I use selected from different places. So I have the one that you're pointing to is in China, the in Xi'an, the tomb for Qin Shi Huang, and the terracotta tomb. Then another images that you're pointing to is the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And I have places that is taking the landmark of different country that we are all familiar with, to juxtapose this, the flowers, to make that more kind of international world that we are living in. So that's what I is making the piece. I hope that it will be more beautiful for all of us.
Thank you. And then we're going to head over here, Paul, and look at the last piece by Wanxin. And this one is called Four Seasons from 2011-12. Wanxin, do you want to tell us a little bit about the history on this piece? And
okay, you know, I was growing up during the 1960, 1970, the last centuries. And the back then, the mall was like the god figure for, especially for the young generations like us. So, you know, back then, the China was isolated from outside the world. We have no idea, you know, but this is what happened outside. But we know that China was paradise. It's every single family you have to have a display in major spot, you know, because you have to worship them all every single days. You know, that moment back then we have no TV, no, you know, social media, paper, or the radios. Outside the world is nothing for us. The more words, more imageries everywhere, you know, public place in the private home. So, but this kind of things, this kind of stuff, now you can find any antique shop or, you know, some even, you know, tour destination, you can get it like a souvenir. So this kind of small statue from the moment, and I manipulated surrounding area, surrounding structure with the decal, with the color face, and but this moment when I think about Mao, I think he's not God figures. He's not God. He basically, for me, is like for us like a drama characters.
It's amazing how short our memories are.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is you cannot forget it. This is a pretty. So many people, the family have a go through the pretty tough moment, and second year's Cultural Revolution began. I went to a local elementary school in the Northeast, so the whole world, whole universal for us just because Mao. So after Mao passed away, late 70s, the China opened the door for the West. And the Chinese government, the right evaluation, Cultural Revolution, and the right thinking Mao savers.
Thank you. And now we'll move over to another piece of Beth Lowe's work. Can you tell us about these particular pieces?
Yeah, so I did a lot of caregiving for my mother these last, well, she passed away 2 years ago. So these pieces were done during the time I was caregiving for my mother. And I started thinking a little bit about, well, I always think about family, but in particular, I think as you see someone age, you start thinking a little bit about your own mortality and thinking about my mother's mortality. So I started thinking about urn form a little bit more. And I like to do vase forms. And I think that, Chinese a lot of times do things in pairs. So some of that was coming from those ideas. And then the imagery itself on the pieces have to do with family, but they also derive specifically from Chinese funerary papers. So in a lot of Chinatowns, you can go buy these very cheap papers that have amazing imagery on them. And I did some sort of collecting of some of those things and copying some of those images. And then the other thing that I'm interested in is how some Chinese porcelains are managed to put images together in ways that look like patterns, but there's actually no repetition at all. So I'm copying some of the compositional ideas and then also using specific images that I got from funerary papers. And once again, thinking about the legacy that I have to pass on to the next generation that was passed on to me from my mother. So these vases actually have a little bit to do with mortality, even though they're pretty festive.
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned paper because we had someone come in, we've had limited access for people, and they said that the work almost felt like it was paper mache, that it had this really lightness about it.
Yes, I've heard that before. And part of the, I also like coil building. I like the mark of the hand. I really don't like things that are too tight. So for me, the process of coil building is very meditative and very healing. It's a lot like knitting. So I like the idea of showing that in the final pieces, that they have that growth quality that you get when you're hand building, when you're coil building. It's just layer by layer. It's very slow and repetitive. It's very soothing. And I make when I make pairs, I use a template so I can get I use a big cardboard profile so I can get the two vases the same shape. And
Beth, don't you have like many other talents? Like you're also a musician and a children's books illustrator.
Yes, my sister and I are very close, and so we've collaborated on a couple of children's books. We have a couple others in the hopper. But yeah, so the children imagery, of course, just comes from that whole line of working with the idea of the child, and our Chinese American upbringing. You'll see some of the kids are wearing Chinese clothes and some of them are wearing American clothes. And then the music, I don't know, sometimes I think with music, I like to have a certain amount of improvisation. I'm definitely not a classical musician. I like to have a structure and then a lot of playfulness in carrying out an idea. So I guess there's some relationship there.
And then you also will turn the corner here and see your next piece, because you talked about legacy with the vases, and the next piece is called What We Pass On. So it seems appropriate that this is the last works of yours that we're going to look at.
Yes, and that's exactly, it's very straightforward. Those are the same ideas that were carried out in the vase, but put onto as if pattern onto the figures. Similarly, like with paired vases, I like the idea of a boy and a girl just as contrast, similar but different, and encompassing both the male and female sex. And just for instance, like those leaf patterns, the black leaf patterns, those are directly copied from funerary papers. And then there's the character for boy there. And the idea that you would decorate a vase or decorate something with another vase, that's done in Chinese pottery a lot. And I think it gives you a sense of wealth that you are passing on to another generation. It's like when you see pictures of vases depicted on vases, I feel like these are sort of show-offy things, like I own this vase. This is how wealthy I am. I can have this very exquisite vase. And that leaf pattern on the back is copied from funerary papers, and those sort of incense triangles are copied from funerary papers. So, yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Passing on. And then last but not least is Cathy Lu. And we have her work right here. Cathy was born in 1984, and in her words, the only Chinese American family in Miami, Florida. Her neighborhood was home to Cuban exiles and immigrants. She holds a BA and a BFA from Tufts University in Massachusetts, and an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute. And since 2018, Cathy has taught at Mills College in Oakland as an assistant adjunct professor of studio art. This first piece is called Peach with Faces from the Afterlife. Cathy, can you sort of talk about your use of peaches in your work?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Beth. It's been so interesting hearing all the other artists talk about their work as well. But yeah, peaches, I use a lot of peaches in my work. I'm always fascinated with their strong presence in Chinese culture, symbols of longevity and prosperity, but also they have this very strong presence in American culture as well, sort of gendered and sexual connotations. Also very American fruit, a lot of Southern desserts feature peaches. Peaches are the state fruit of Georgia. And so for me, it made me think about my parents' experience and our experience growing up in Florida, how many of the mainstream markets just didn't really have Chinese produce. And so we would always have to go to the one market that was 45 minutes away. So it made me think about this idea of fruits, and when they stop becoming exotic and make it into mainstream markets, like peaches, which are actually native to Southern China, but have become so integrated into American markets, right? So yeah, I sort of use that as a metaphor to think about just immigration and ideas of belonging. But also I made my peaches super lumpy. Actually, people I don't know that they recognize them as peaches either. That's just because I always think like people always simplify this idea of being hyphenated American, like, oh, you're half Chinese and then you're half American. But in actuality, it's sort of like more, I feel complicated than that. Like you sort of create a new culture by combining those two cultures. So for me, those peaches are, I call them like third culture peaches, basically. So they're just like these weird mutated transformed peaches that sort of express this idea of like a new culture or a third culture.
And I know you don't just do peaches, you use food in a lot of your work.
I do, yeah.
And also, I know you're very interested in race, and do you have any thoughts on the intersection of art and activism in recent times?
Well, Beth, that's a hard-hitting question. No, I think it's really, no, I mean,
sorry, I didn't prepare you for that one.
No, it's no problem. You know, I wouldn't call my art like activism because I think it's just so layered and more nuanced. And I think of activism being more like, I guess, in your face. And so I do believe in being politically active, and I sort of have that aspect of my life, but I don't really integrate it into my artwork as much, I would say. I kind of let my artwork just like, I feel like I want it to just be its own weird thing. Because I also think it's very complicated too. Like, I don't know that I know any of the right answers either. Yeah.
And can you talk about the figures that are on these next two pieces?
Oh yeah.
Combined with your peaches?
Totally, yeah. So I also have been, I reference a lot of like historical, like Chinese art genres. And so this one actually references 100 Boys Playing or Boys Playing. The idea, like you'll see it on noodle packaging too even. But the idea is that like by depicting these young boys playing, it foreshadows their future successes as adults. And you know, girls weren't really featured in that genre traditionally. So I decided to make my own version, and like just sort of also thinking about like gendered ideas of play between boys and girls, also like gendered ideas in American and Chinese culture. So yeah, I decided to make like my own version of sort of like subvert that traditional version and include just all girls. So these are just little girls.
And they have like little bows on their hair.
Yeah, actually it's funny. In some of my other pieces, they're a lot more sexual and violent, and this one they're more chill. They're relaxed.
More chill.
Yeah.
And then the images on this last one, that's Peaches with Heads from 2018.
Oh yeah. So yeah, again, thinking about like being a third culture kid, I think, you know, like many of the artists have sort of already talked about this idea of like place or being displaced. I think for me, like I always felt like weird. And I think when you don't fit into a perfect category, you sort of have the sense of like ugliness or grotesque, or you might associate yourself with that more. So with these peaches too, I actually looked at a lot of like weird skin, or not weird, but just like illustrations of skin diseases, and that's why they're so lumpy. I'd also been watching a lot of, what's her name? Dr. Pimple Popper. I don't know if anyone.
Oh God. Is that on TikTok or is that on?
It's on YouTube, Beth. It's on YouTube.
I'll have to look it up when we're done today.
Yeah, so anyway, so I decided to like play with that idea of like Dr. Pimple Popper and having the little girl heads like popping out like they were pimples.
Oh my. I did not see that coming.
You're welcome. Not very academic, I recognize, but it definitely was like an inspiration for this. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the last piece in the show is by Jennifer Datchuk, and this one is called Basic Bitch. And you want to talk about, it clearly is in the same series as the Money Honey piece. You want to talk about this, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think about how nail salons and beauty salons are sites for female companionship, but they are also sites for where identity is discussed and appropriation happens. So thinking of like nail art and the collisions of identity and beauty. Basic, if you don't know what basic means, it is dictionary.com describes it as someone who is, I want to get this right, as someone who is unoriginal, unexceptional, or mainstream. That basic bitch in some way is an insult, but what is kind of amazing about like the migration and how this word has kind of traveled through urban pop culture and like mainstream culture is that now it's become like good to be basic. You want to be basic. And now it was interesting to how this word became an insult to something people really identify with. That the construction of the image and the object is done with like the emoji hands, thinking of how like Money Honey is like this peace sign, and then like the praise hands as emojis are also parts of like visual language now, and how that sometimes we just respond and reply to things with emojis. We don't even have to use words, and there's a basic understanding of what that is. And that I collaborated with an Asian-owned nail salon in San Antonio. That nail salons in San Antonio are one of the few places where I can see other Asian women, that they're almost all owned by Vietnamese families, that they're all immigrants, and that often when I go, I don't get the same responsive rest and relaxation, and that I go and like, where do you go shopping? Where did you come from? It's like a point where like we get to tell each other's life stories with strangers. That this Asian-owned salon I went to, I walked in and said, give me blue and white nails. And like, you do it, you decide. And those were the nails they painted. And then they also were like, oh, basic. Okay, this is what a basic girl's nails would look like. And so this is where I loved how this work was in collaboration with Glaze Nail Salon, but that we talked about our mothers at this time, because it's such an intimate experience to sit across from someone and have someone cut your cuticle. That how so much of the labor that happens in beauty salons is that of Black, brown, and yellow bodies in service of the beauty of whiteness.
Well, thank you. And that is the last piece in the show, but we are right on time and have time for all of you to ask questions. If you could stay muted until you're ready to ask a question. And also Nathan, if you put anything in the chat, he'll be able to ask those questions as well. So Nathan, I'll let you sort of control.
So hello, everybody. So I'll be moderating a little Q&A here at the end. So if you could use the raise hand feature or type in chat, and I'll call on you when we get to you. First and foremost, I'm pleased that our current president of AMOCA's board of directors is here, Alex Ehrlich. And would you like to kick it off with your question, Alex?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad all the artists could join us tonight, because it really adds another layer of depth to understanding the show. And it's been really fun to hear what you've had to say about each of the pieces. I'm wondering how much the current events of the last year are creeping into the work that you're making in your studios right now, particularly how so many Asian Americans are having acts of racism against them, and how China's been in the news, whether it was for COVID or for what's going on in Hong Kong with the security laws, and even for the Uyghurs out west. And I wonder if that's changing what you're doing in the studio right now, or if it's still kind of on the same direction of what we see in the show. And I don't know who wants to answer that.
Well, I think we definitely we need to go ahead, Beth.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll just have a really quick one. I did 2 fundraisers this year. One was political and one was for COVID. And the COVID ones, I just did a series of COVID related plates, themed plates with people wearing masks and socially distancing. And some of those were specifically about the blame game that was happening. So the COVID, there would be 2 little kids, each wearing masks, and they would be pointing at each other and saying it's your fault. And sometimes it would be China's fault or the United States' fault. So that was very, very direct. And then politically, it was such a crazy year. I did a series of voter registration plates, and they were just my own little private fundraisers. I got a few other artists to be involved, and we made work about those 2 issues and then gave money to various causes. So that was very direct. Go ahead, Wang.
Okay, I think we must have a responsibility, respond for this kind of social change. And for me, I think this is part of my obligations is the artist. Whatever that happened in the world, what happens around you, you must be have a. I don't know. This is part of my art, part of my the sculpture always do. The following the happening in the world, happening. Just like I said before, like something new is coming. Even the fake news, because when I was growing up, all this fake news surrounding us. That's why I say the changing location, changing my mind, because you see things differently. You see things from different angles, not just one channel. You have a judgment. You have to think about analysis. This I think this is part of our job.
I think at the start of this, the conversations in my household were like, we didn't want to make work about the pandemic. And I think it was just trying to make sense of trying to teach online how to care for our community. And like my husband and I are so far away from our families that it feels like we're even further away now. And just knowing when this also started, how no one wanted to go to nail salons, no one wanted to eat in Chinatown, that so many Asian businesses have been suffering because of the start of this, and then the continued hateful rhetoric and xenophobia that our president perpetuated. So the nail salons I'm close with were all just like begging for people to come in. And so I started making series of back scratchers with decorative nails at the end, talking about how like they scratch your back, but you won't scratch theirs. This kind of, in some ways, these acts of self-care that we use, like yellow labor, to make others more comfortable. I think those things were there in my work, but I feel like now it's more amplified, and it goes through these waves where just like trying to make work now is just hard.
For me, I think of activism and politics as really central to my practice, but maybe it's not so obvious in the work that I'm making, and maybe the work I'm making hasn't changed in the last year, but it's really important for me to use my platform on social media, where for some reason I have over 20,000 followers. I don't understand why, but to use that platform to talk about these issues, to talk about what's going on in the Asian community, to talk about Orientalism in mainstream media, especially around COVID. And so I try to use my work as much as possible as a means of raising money for the causes I care about. So because we were all trapped in our houses for all of 2020, I did many more fundraisers than I normally do. I think I did about 8, and people donated over $30,000, which is so much more than I could have ever imagined I could raise. But that feels really important to me to connect that to the work I'm making.
Oh, thank you all very much. Oh, and Sin-ying, you're next.
Hi, I think also I'm teaching, spend a lot of time trying to figure out and I navigate with students and under all the restrictions in my teaching. And I think I do more of the Zoom meeting and then suiting my my teaching demonstration more than making work, unfortunately. And but I think I do, in my work, I don't really change much of my direction because I still focusing on the experience and journey that I'm going through with, I'm not the second generation. I'm still count myself a very new in this continent, and 29 years is not long, but it's long enough. I don't know. I look back at seeing all this younger generation and come up and then making amazing work. But I always try to find the neutral of the path that I'm going through, because it's the things that happen is not just happen to us, it's happened to all of us. So I make a piece that which is inspired by the pandemic, but I'm more geared towards as myself as a person, and how I see the world connected. The pandemic is not just in Asia or North America, but it's also in Italy. in Germany and other world. So my work is always, people think my work being like activist, political sometimes, but I think that I'm more geared towards to understanding the life and storytelling, and hopefully that there's another viewpoint to look at our today world and make our future world a more beautiful as a more utopian person. And so that's how I'm conducting my studio work right now. And my half of my time, it is in Jingdezhen, and I make my work in Jingdezhen, China. And now I cannot go back to China. If I went there, I have to quarantine at least like 14 days over there and 14 days in here, and whole month's gone. So I haven't been in China, and my studio was flooded by water, 6 feet tall. Everything was underwater. So I'm in that kind of devastation at some point, but I cannot touch it, so far away.
Wow.
I think
It's
just
hard.
by having a multicultural presentation, and I think it's really important for the mainstream culture to get used to the idea of seeing things that are foreign and seeing things that they don't understand and seeing a language that they can't read right off, and just become comfortable with that kind of exposure. So I think all of the work that we're doing with the multicultural slant or bicultural slant is important, and good to be seen throughout the culture.
Thank you, Beth. Nathan, is there another question?
So we
Nathan, there you go.
Yeah. We have Nick Best, who says, hello from Jingdezhen. I know Sin-ying works here, and obviously Wanxin spent most of his life here. I'm wondering if any of the second generation artists have returned to China to make work, and if yes, was that experience similar to working at home or different in any meaningful way? In between is a sentiment I've heard a lot from Chinese American artists who come to work here in China. Maybe that's a time when third generation, where'd it go? When third culture may feel especially present.
Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
Well, sure. I think in 2019, I was able to go to Jingdezhen for the first time through a grant from the Asian Cultural Council. And I actually traveled through Hong Kong and then up towards Jingdezhen. And yeah, it was super weird experience. It was a really weird experience, I think, for like someone who's like Chinese, Taiwanese, Asian American, to like be in China, because my Mandarin is so poor. And I dress differently, I guess, enough that people can kind of pick me out as a foreigner, but also, you know, whenever I would say I'm American, they would always be like, but I can see your face and I see that you're not American. They're like, no, you're like me. You're like, so I always had these like really interesting conversations where, you know, I remember one time, like, I actually even took some classes at the pottery workshop, and I remember it was like all just sort of like local Chinese students. And, you know, like my language is so poor, and like I didn't know really about WeChat and everything. And so they had to school me in a lot of things. And I just remember like I would get so offended because they would ask me if I knew how to use chopsticks. And I'd be like, of course I know, you know. But then otherwise I was very like not Chinese to them. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think Jingdezhen is so amazing. I think it also really shifted how I feel about ceramics too, because ceramics in the US has a very like East Asian, Japanese, Chinese slant to it as well. And I think in my ceramics education, I always felt really pressured or weird about using porcelain because it was so like fetishized. And like I felt like people wanted me to use porcelain all the time. And I was like, I will not do that. But then once I went to China, it just felt so normal. It's like, it's this like beautiful material that we have. And, you know, they were proud of it. And then actually, so since going to Jingdezhen, I work with a lot more, almost predominantly porcelain now. Yeah.
I first went to Jindajin in 2006, and then 2011, 2015, and 2018. And that to see how much has changed since 2006 to 20, it's like amazing. And I think a lot of it feels really familiar. I speak Cantonese, very bad Cantonese, so like Mandarin, I'm also completely lost. But like also in my Chinese upbringing, I never learned the words for porcelain or glaze, or so like I would have never learned that. But I also just really appreciate talking to like younger students there, and like how, you know, so much of growing up in like an American context is we're taught to have a voice. Whether we have the power to use it or express it is one thing, but talking to Chinese students and how they're just taught to copy, but not like develop their own like artistic power and voice, was something that, those are the conversations I really love. I love that, like when I walk into a store, like I can hear in there, hear in Chinese, like her eyes are Chinese, but her nose isn't. And then I forgot how to say it, but I knew how to say like, yeah, I've been trying my whole life to get rid of this nose. And then they would think I had plastic surgery to get this nose. And I'm like, that's crazy. So that we can have like these conversations. The last time I went, we had whole conversations on Google Translate, which I found so fascinating. And just like, there's this desire to want to connect with one another and learn each other's stories. In terms of making, I make really bad work when I'm there, because it's like what you think you know and how you've taught and what you've learned in clay is so much different there. And I think that's the part I love. Watching like other people experience it, they get extremely frustrated, and there is kind of this demand of like, I paid for this and it should come out this way, where I'm like, I like seeing this all blow up and fall apart because I'm learning more through this process. So I take what I learned there from the masters and like the painting aunties, and I take it back to my studio and figure out a way to work with it in kind of my environment. But I feel like I learn more about what it means to be Chinese every time I go. And I'm really sad I can't go. I was supposed to go last year, then I thought I could go this year. And that I was finally able to find a way to go to northern China to visit these hair markets. And I'm just hoping the world would get better and we can see our families again and meet other makers.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Fantastic. So
I'll be right back. Excuse me.
This next question's for you, Beth. No kidding.
Oh,
No, I'm kidding. I was kidding.
I'll be right back. I'm about out of battery.
Oh. Nathan, you want to ask the next question?
So up next, I want to introduce Ashley Riley, who's our educations manager here at AMOCA. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, thank you guys for having us today. And I also appreciate we were able to sort of give the opportunity to invite our teen council. And so we have a couple members of teen council here. And I'd love to introduce Melody, who has a question for you guys. So Melody, if you want to go ahead and jump on.
Hi, I would just
Melody, we lost you. Are you there?
I'm so sorry. I swiped the screen. I'm on mobile. I haven't really used mobile on Zoom quite a bit. So I want to ask you guys, how has the pandemic affected you, but more so from an artistic standpoint? Like for myself personally, like I found myself a bit stunted a little bit, but I wanted to know if it was just me or if it was the same for you guys. And do you find yourself in a better place, again, artistically now rather than back in March of 2020?
So for me, the biggest change that happened during the pandemic is that I moved my entire art practice into my bedroom. I was really worried about what that would do to my practice and what it would do to my work, and if I could make the work here. And I was preparing for a solo show, so it was really nerve-wracking. But for me, it meant that I had more time to make the work, because it became a part of my life in a way that I couldn't separate. I would go to sleep and wake up and the work would be right there. And surprisingly, it wasn't suffocating. It was actually really comforting that if I need to step away to cook myself dinner, I could come back and everything would still be right here. I know that's, I'm very lucky for that to be the case, and that a lot of people have struggled to make work in this time. And obviously there's no judgment there, but for me, it was really good to be kind of locked up with the clay.
It's a great answer.
I will say that
Nathan?
yes or no, because I'm pretty sure a pandemic, they impact many things, for the friend and families. But a little change from my situation, I believe it doesn't matter pandemic or not. Mostly artists is isolated inside the studio, it's similar like before, you don't have a chance, access outside worlds. You have to do it, basically the sculpture, I think everybody knows this is labor time, you better just spend more hour, inside the studio.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So I think we have enough time for maybe one more question. Ashley, did you have another part of Teen Council that wanted to ask a question? Oh.
I did, but unfortunately his internet disconnected. So why don't we can pass it on to somebody else in the audience.
One more question from the chat. So we have Amelia, and she's asking, I'm wondering how you all feel about the technique of, oh, the phone's gonna ring.
Best laid intentions.
Yeah, right. So Amelia asks, I'm wondering how you all feel about the technique of self-orientalizing in art. It strikes me as a complicated and sometimes problematic thing for Asian artists to do, but at other times it can be a powerful act of reappropriation and reclaiming. Thoughts?
So I can answer these questions and for Amelia, and I see the powerful of the appropriation, because I deliberate to appropriate and to learn and get deeper understanding of these Oriental kind of imageries or patterns. Because I think when I look back to the history, all these kind of symbols that I use or I study from, they're all like almost like a language. And to me, they are not just like orienting myself, but I would use it as the identification, my identity. And this is where I am familiar with, this is what I'm coming from. This is what I grew up with. And so it became more powerful for me to develop my language for the last 20 years, working with juxtaposition between East and West, and then using language of linguistic language versus pattern symbols. So that's what I would like to kind of echo, respond to Amelia's questions.
I think for me, it comes from my first source is family, and my work took that direction when I gave birth to my son, which was 33 years ago. And when I had my son, that's when I started to look into, again, sort of like what I had to pass on to him, and then looking at my own parents. And that's where the link to Asian culture came for me, as well as several trips to see my mother's family in particular in China, who are quite an amazing group of people. So that's the connection is sort of very, very basic and natural for me, I think.
I'd be curious to see if Jennifer and Cathy had the same experience, but I know that for me and a lot of other second generation Asian Americans, part of growing up here but being othered is that you go through a phase of kind of self-hatred where you wish you were white. You want to push away whatever it is that makes you other. And so for me, it's not that self-orientalizing is necessarily a technique, you know, or that somehow it's artificial, but that both embracing being Asian and pushing being Asian away are both organic and artificial, right? We're always just trying to navigate whatever identity is, whatever that means to be Asian American. And so I think that I don't know, I guess I don't see it as problematic, but I do see it as very complex.
Ditto.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Stephanie. I think this idea, sorry, I just forgot what I was going to say, but this idea of like self-orientalizing is so interesting because I think like it's sort of hard. I mean, this is obviously the experience of like being ethnically or visually East Asian in the US, right? Like you have very different experiences based on it. Like we all have such different racialized experiences, almost different realities almost. So yeah, it's hard to talk about those themes without pointing to it. And then how do you point to it without perpetuating the stereotypes? I know that's something I think about a lot, and I don't know that I have an answer for that question. I just know that like, you know, if it's honest, if it's your experience and you're talking about it, that feels good and normal. But that is something I think about all the time. It's like, oh, is this perpetuating a stereotype? But I don't think about it as much anymore because I think I just try to make it, I don't know, the way I want to see it or something. I thought about it a lot like a few years ago, but now less so for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's like, agree with all of y'all that it's this intention of like learning more about your culture and where you come from. And I think partly it was like, I just remember growing up and I was like, why can't I eat an orange today? Or why can't I stay at a friend's house that has the number 4 in it? It was like all these rules that I like could not like understand why I can't live life. Now I'm like, oh, 4, never mind, that's okay. See you another day. Like those things like crept back in with this like understanding and love and acceptance for my family and where I came from and like this like rich history and culture and tradition. But I think it's still problematic. I still am working through a lot of things. I'm unlearning a lot and then having to learn and unpack a lot of things, which is a lot of work to do on yourself, but also try and understand like what your family overcame too. That I think it's like the intention of my work is to like discuss those stereotypes, but try and like pick them apart and show them through a different lens and just how like messy and complicated how we identify is. So I'm like here for that journey.
The idea of appropriation is one I've been thinking a lot about recently, because I think that when we say appropriation, we mean, oh, to be borrowing from another culture without giving it due credit, right? But I'm realizing the more I think about it, that culture has always been fluid. One culture is always influenced by another culture. So to say, oh, our culture owns this piece of history or this way of thinking or this way of making art is to almost try to freeze a culture in time and say, no, it's done evolving and this is what it is now. And so I think I'm starting to push back against this, the whole concept of appropriation. Of course, like we always want credit to be given where it's due, and we want everything to be made and consumed thoughtfully, but that maybe we as a culture have taken the idea of appropriation almost too far. These are some ideas I've been mulling over lately.
I think about that all the time, and I'm reading Cathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings, and she has like a chapter on it and like the idea of cultural exchange. But this idea too, if we stay in our own lane, this is essentially how culture dies. So I think it all goes back to intention and how you put it out in the world and how you like have those difficult conversations, like in not like shutting each other out, but how we can like exist in this messiness, and acknowledge that too, that we also don't have all the answers, because I think we're still all evolving in this like framework and conversation.
That's so funny. I was just about to quote Cathy Park Hong as well. She has this really great way of talking about culture. which she says, like, I think because we live in a capitalistic society, we think of culture as a commodity or like an object to be owned, when in actuality, it's something that's shared. That's just like the inherent nature of it. But then again, of course, I think, you know, we see in the United States how, like, again, like giving credit where credit is due. You know, if there's like an Asian American artist that does like really beautiful blue and white pottery, why is the white artist like making the money doing that? You know, like, it's just like those kind of questions where credit, like giving credit where credit is due, and also recognizing their racialized like hierarchy that does exist. Yeah.
I also wonder, like, who is allowed to make a racist joke? Like, am I allowed to make a racist joke in the presence of white people, or am I only allowed to make a racist joke with my Chinese friends? And it's you know, I think about that a lot for Black culture too. You see that a lot, and you see a lot of that sort of appropriation and taking names or whatever. Anyway, it's a question that I think is pretty interesting.
And I kind of see in a different perspective. Like in Chinese, we have old saying, borrow a boulder from other mountain. So there's a kind of the teaching that we're learning always, borrowing other people, good things that we learn from it. And in our art history that we learn about like appropriation, and I look at the past that it's a lot of things that we appropriate from each other. And it's just how the culture was influencing each other from generation to generation. So that's all said about borrow boulder from other mountain, which is very difficult, but then we all try to learn from each other at some point.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to end this conversation. It sounds like we may need to schedule another one to continue some of these topics. I really appreciate everyone participating today and for joining us. The next exhibition in this series of Making in Between is Making in Between LGBTQ+ identities, and that'll be coming up in a couple of years. Our next presentation, Zoom presentation, is going to be the intersection of art and science, and you'll start seeing that pop up on our website shortly. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. This was a great way to end this show, and we're so glad we had a chance to share this with you. So thank you again for joining us. And if you love what we do, join as a member of AMOCA. So thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you, Beth Ann.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody.